first session was about fair data. Like what does a repository look like? What should you expect of a repository or a database when you publish data? Today is the bit which is your responsibility. What do you think about when you're actually uploading data, preparing data, when you're actually going to do this at the end of a project or when you publish a paper? And I'm going to go through sort of a two-pass, if you like. I'm going to go firstly through, okay, these are the most important things. So stay awake for that bit so you don't miss that. And then I'll go through more details. And if you need to zone out because it's Friday, zone out a bit there. But I'll let you know. Why publish research data? The aim is to stop treating data as a single-use product. Make your data, you publish your paper, and the data sits on a hard drive until eventually the computer becomes obsolete or lost or crashes or whatever, which has been the history of data for decades in research. And this is really an effort to get away from that. So let me give you an example. This is a paper published by one David Rayner in Journal of Climate in 2007. Don't need to worry too much about the details. Wind run changes, dominant factor affecting pan evaporation. So, yep, Australia's a dry place. Now, there's a doi. Now, no, where are we? And if you read through the paper, eventually you'll get to a section which says monthly anomalation time series of observed and modeled evaporation, solar radiation, all the things you need for climate. For all the stations used in the attribution study are available online in http://naturalresourcesandmine.queensland.gov.au. Now, if you go to that web address, you can probably guess what happens. No, you can't because it doesn't work. Go ahead. Yeah, you get this. And this is because I left, the other people who are involved presumably have left, government departments get moved around, the website manager moves, and eventually someone has thought, what are these data files? Why do we have these on our web page? And they've just got lost. And they are lost. They're not on the Internet Archive. They're gone. Now, if the paper itself, imagine if research papers from international journals from 2007 randomly disappeared from the internet, or libraries. We would think this was a catastrophe, right? But that the data disappeared is just sort of what has happened. So let me take a different example. This is from our research data catalog. And you can see up the top, it has a section number 0001, version 1. So this is the first data set published in the Swedish repository. It was published in 1982. What's that? It's like 48 years ago? No, 44 years ago. And it's still there. And you can still apply for it. And that's the difference between publishing data in a repository and putting on a web page or on a OneDrive. We don't know what's going to happen with GitHub, for example, but repositories have a real commitment to keeping data available. And so if you want the data that you've made that supports your article to live, use a repository. Right, what do you do? Either choose a well-known subject-specific repository And I have some examples here that are maybe not appropriate for your field, but maybe protein data bank might be biosamples, or a generic repository like Zenodo, Figshare, if any of your organizations have a Figshare. No, some do, some don't. And I just put in ours there at the moment, but probably not so interesting for some of you. It would be interesting. Yes, the Swedish people. Actually, anyone can if you want to. Right. So you're going to publish in a research data repository. You want to make your data fair. What do you need to do? Is this the first list? No. Why do you do it? You make it accessible, independent. So the data set shouldn't be an extension of the paper. This is my data. It was made for this paper, but the data set is described by itself. It should have persistent identifier, should have structured metadata. We've been through this, properly documented, clear license conditions. It can have restricted access as long as there's instructions on how to get it. So, starting off, choose the right repository. We looked at a couple today, and you could see some pros and cons. Subject-specific repository is actually usually the best, because this is often where researchers will go to get data of a particular type. If you're publishing a supplementary information, you're better off going with Zenodo. Often there's tables, for example, data for figures. Things are really tightly coupled to your article. They can't stand alone. Then they can be a supplementary instead. Other things to think about. Is it free? This is often a consideration when you go to publish data. How big a data set can you publish? What's the limit on what they'll take? Does it give you a DOI? We mentioned that. Is there a quality review? And does it have certification? These two are connected. If a data repository has a certification like Core Trust Seal, that means that they review the data that goes in. And that's to avoid the problem we saw this morning, where there's a field for adding a description and no one does it. Okay, so curated means, or quality review means, someone will look at what you've uploaded and said, not that they don't look at the scientific issues, like when you submit a journal, but it's like, have you described this data set? Is someone else going to be able to understand what you've done there? Did you fill in your ORCID, for example? And then two big points which we're going to come to. Does it allow publishing of personal data if relevant? And does it allow restricted access where relevant? So some things to think about when you go to publish. And we looked at a couple of these. Maybe we'll come back to them later. We saw these two this morning, but I had a look at the data management plan for the project. So which repositories are mentioned, and there was Zenodo, CSIC's digital archive, there was another Dataverse repository, and there was one just called Other, but that's okay. The data management plan, you fix it later. Now, if you're thinking this is a lot of work, yeah, it is. There are benefits. The most important benefit, I would say, is to avoid disasters. I've heard cases where the reviewer has had access to the data set, has downloaded the data set, looked at it, and found problems, found errors in the processing, which could be corrected then before publication. Myself, I've been involved in a project where we had to publish the data. I made the data set, and I shared it with my colleagues just to get their feedback. And one of my colleagues downloaded it and said, "Oh, you've made a mistake here. You flipped latitude and longitude." Okay. So that was good too. But I think the biggest, I talk about avoiding disasters. The most important thing is if you show that you're being transparent in your research, you're far less likely to be accused of, what do I say, research malpractice if you make a mistake. Yeah, because it's clear you're not hiding anything. So it's a bit of, think of it as an insurance policy there. The other more positive, increased impact and visibility. You've seen that in a good repository, people can get to your research articles, which you want them to read, from your data set, as long as you link them properly. Enhance the credibility of your research. This is a question, this is now a research question in its own right. Does making data available lead to research being seen as more credible? And it seems that the answer is yes, which is hardly surprising if people publish in a proper repository. For your future self, the statement is, I think, that your most important collaborator is yourself 6 months from now, and your past self doesn't answer emails. So when you publish a data set, you force yourself, or even just preparing a data set for publication, you force yourself to organize it properly, to document it properly, so that when you need to come back to it, it's in a format that you can find it and understand it. I've had one person ask directly after having published a data set, where was that data file you helped me fix? It's like, well, it's in the data set. Go and get it yourself. And obviously, you benefit because in some cases, your journals or your funding bodies or your university require that you make data, you publish data. So you can't get away from it sometimes. But if you prepare to publish data right from the start, so it's not a really big job at the end, then the benefits outweigh the time cost, if you like. That's been my experience anyway. Okay, here's the important list, so pay attention. How do you publish data in a curated research data repository? And I don't mean just going through and filling in the bits. I mean, what do you need to think about? Choose accessible file formats, fill in the relevant metadata, provide documentation, use a license, publish your results open access, that means your paper, and update the dataset metadata with the publications citation, and cite your dataset in your publication. Do all these things, and you have a good dataset publication. A little bit of technology first. When I say dataset, I mean the files, and the documentation, and the metadata. The whole package is what we call a data set. I've talked about open access and restricted access before. And I briefly talked then about trusted repositories and the manual review process. So let's start with accessible file formats. What do I mean by an accessible file format? As a general rule, choose something that's likely to be usable in the future. So anything that's commonly used, it can be read by multiple software. Hopefully, there's a technical specification somewhere that defines it, even if you don't have that. And it could be open or it could be proprietary. I'm getting a lot of, are we getting feedback from a previous, That's a bit disturbing, actually. What have we got going on here? Who just, yeah, thanks. So obviously, open is preferred to proprietary. Proprietary means someone owns the software to read or write it. I think we're good now. Yes. Yes. Nice. But sometimes the proprietary formats are the most commonly used. So in statistics, the SPSS file format is like very widely used by social science researchers. It fulfills the criteria. You can read it with open source software, even if formally someone owns it. You'll get this video. We have a list of file formats that we recommend, and you can check other repositories too. Fill in relevant metadata. We talked a bit about this before. What do I mean by metadata? No, not what Meta knows about you. We mean the information which, there we go again. Maybe, is it just a delay perhaps? Or was it this morning? I can't hear what it was. No? Another. It's very strange. Do you hear it as well? Yeah. Maybe it is just a delay. It's very weird. Okay. I'll keep going for a little bit and we'll see what happens. I think it must be myself delayed. You mean like here? All right, we'll give that a go. It's like a ghost. Is it something being played here, perhaps? I don't think so. No? All right. Okay. Well, it's quiet again now. But was this our morning conversation? Shall I just try and keep going and see what we can do? I've lost my train of thought. Right. What I mean is try and actually fill in all the relevant information. Like some repositories will have, ours has just so many fields and you don't need to fill them in. You can see here, like some things have a little red dot. Why does title not have a red dot? Obviously that has a red dot. I don't know why. Oh, this whole field is all compulsory. That's why. Title, description, research principle, which is what university formally owns the data set. This is one of the metadata fields which is most commonly missed, and it's really quite important when someone wants to reuse the data set to know, especially if the researcher has moved, who owns this. So yeah, you saw this morning in some of the contact engineering, those descriptions were pretty short and not very useful. Try and do better. Then, so again here, oh, okay. Here's a data set, and we can see it's got all the things you need. It's got okay. Right. What I wanted to show here was that this is the metadata on, for example, our page, and you can see it's all nicely formatted. But if you do it properly, your data set can then be harvested. The description can be taken by other catalogs too. So this CESTA catalog, for example, Consortium of European Social Sciences Archives, they have their own data, an aggregator, where you can go and look for social science data from any university in Europe. So all the repositories provide. And then it's really important that the things come up in the right place, the title is in the right place, etc. And you can see some of the things here, like there was a geographic metadata. Where was the study done? And you can filter by that. So fill in the metadata, and it makes it easier for people to find exactly what they're after. And the ORCID, of course, use this because it allows people to get, oh, I don't have an example here, but yeah, get yourself an ORCID, use it whenever you publish anything, make sure your works are listed so that people want to know, oh, who's this person? Do I trust what they do? They can click on it and see who you are. And you can link your ORCID to your GitHub and to your LinkedIn or whatever else you use as your research, your web page, your own research personality, your presence on the web. By documentation. What documentation should I provide? I'll make a difference here between project documentation and dataset documentation. Projects generate enormous amount of documentation. Anytime you're going to have your application for funding, you have a research plan, you have data management plan, you've got people involved. Okay, we've got consent forms, we've got information forms, like lots of documentation. You don't need to provide all that for your data set. Your data set, what you want is that someone who is not involved in collecting the data should be able to understand it and use it without asking you, just by reading what you provide. So think about that what's obvious to you might not be obvious to somebody else. And if you're publishing data that you think this could be used by somebody in a different field, then this becomes sort of a higher priority. If you're publishing some really specific the data types, I guess a lot of what you'll be providing here is going to be pretty specific to people in the field. But maybe some of the AI algorithms could have uses. Think about it. How could they be used outside of by other fields? One of the most popular data sets we have is by someone who made a synthetic data set of how you put components together in the truck company Scania. And lots of people like this for optimization purposes. It's sort of a little bit viral in the field. People who do nothing to do with trucks or engines or anything, but it's just a good data set to use to test out algorithms. there's no hard rules on what's metadata and what's documentation. So what by metadata, I mean, what do you enter into those fields in the web page? And documentation is, it's in a file that you attach. As long as it's there. But think also that documentation files, not always, but they're often freely available, even if a data set has restricted access. Now, different repositories do this differently, but in ours is the documentation should always be free. So don't put any personal information in it. Don't put copyrighted material in it. It should be documentation should be something that can be freely distributed. So what can you put in? Variable lists with explanation of what the variable names, codes, abbreviations, etc. mean. That's the most important thing. What's in this file? This file has these variables. What do these variables mean? So I review natural science data sets, and the most common error is people forget to include the units of whatever it is. They write, yeah, it's temperature. It's temperature in what? Is it in Kelvin? Is it in Celsius? Is it in Fahrenheit? And for geographic data, people forget that time has a unit. And I've spent weeks in cases in my previous job trying to put together climate data sets where people haven't said what the time convention was. Was it universal time? Was it local time? Did they include daylight savings? Did they not include daylight savings? In some cases, people changed the clocks the wrong. Oh, it's a mess. But those sort of things are really useful when you try and reuse data. Questionnaires or surveys, if you have that type of data, interview forms, guides, method descriptions is useful documentation. Often it's in the article, but if you have a, what do you call it, in a lab protocol that was used, that's good documentation. Any information about how the data has been processed. If you've removed bad values, what did you do? You don't need to go down to that. I pulled out the values at this level, but at least say, is this what came out of the instrument? Or have you gone through and like shaved off all the hairy bits? Reports, instructions for proprietary software, field diaries, logbooks, that type of thing. Anything that helps someone else reuse your data set, you can put in. This sounds like a ghost. One of the most important things is to include a README text. Now, have you met these concepts before with software? Yes. So often if you go to a GitHub repository, there's a README, and it's like an overview. What's in this repository? And so your README should list out the files and folders and just say what they are. Give a guide, a very quick guide to the data set. And sometimes you can actually describe the contents of each file, like a CSV file, for example, where the description of the columns isn't in the file. It needs to go somewhere else. If there's not too many files, you can put that in the README. If there's like 500 columns, then maybe you want a separate file. But this is usually what people will look for first, a README to help understand how the data set's structured. And we sometimes get the comment that we don't need documentation, it's all in the paper. But the research paper usually doesn't go down to this level. Your research paper, you don't describe individual files and where they are in a folder structure and what different variables are named. You work at a higher level in your research paper. But if someone wants to reuse the data, they need that type of information. Yes, so typical README for a CSV or Excel file will list the columns in the data file, describe each one, what is it, and try and make it clear how the information in the file relates to what you've said in your journal article. If you use particular terminology in the journal article to describe a particular variable at a particular processing stage, right? This is after these steps. This was used in this figure. Okay, this is the column which has the data for that figure. Data in the previous column, yeah, it's also the temperature data, but it was before we had done this processing on it. Aim for that type of information. State of, yeah, the units, I mentioned that. Values of categorical variables is where you have often in a research, like a multi-question, what do you call that? Survey, choose 1, 2, 3. The data file probably only has 1, 2, or 3. Somewhere you need an explanation of what was answer number 1, what was answer number 2, what was answer number 3. I don't know if you're going to have too much of that type of data. Is there social science involved in the process, or is it all hard science here? Yeah, that can make it easier. So I'm not sure how much categorical information you have there. But this one you might have. Explain the quality codes of missing values. Often you'll remove flag data as bad for different reasons. It's good if you can say why they are, what you did. Use the license. I'm going to talk more about licenses later. But I just re-emphasize what you talked about at lunchtime, that sometimes without a license, some companies won't use their data. They'll just say, no, we don't know if we're going to get in trouble. We don't know whether we're allowed to use this or not. We're just not going to do it. As researchers, you don't care so much. Usually, you're happy to take data and reuse it. But the problem is when you try and republish a data set, what happens? No. We'll get to, oh yeah, well there's license. All right, why complicate things with the license? That was open ChatGPT's can you make an image illustrating a data license? I'm not really sure that ChatGPT understood about licensing data. And maybe there's a reason for this, because maybe the inventors of ChatGPT really didn't take any notice of the licenses of the data which they used to train the model. I don't know. Okay, a license is a standardized way to describe data sets, terms and conditions, and it makes it easier for a secondary user to know if they're allowed to use the data set. Often people think with the license, oh, I'm restricting the use of data, because that's what we usually think of licenses, as some sort of restriction. But actually it doesn't have to be that way. You can give something a Creative Commons 0 license. It's not formally a license, but anyway, which says you do whatever you want with this, right? A license is just a statement of what you're allowed to do. It doesn't necessarily restrict people. Has anyone looked to see if your university has a policy for this? We're going to do this in 5 minutes, okay? I'm going to go through this list, and then I'm going to say to you all, right, now I want you to go to your university's homepage, and we're going to look for data policies. Many repositories force a Creative Commons CC BY. And here's the final thing. After all this, licenses on research data in many cases are not legally binding. We don't know what European courts are going to say about this. I'm not aware of any case ever being prosecuted. But the thing is, to be copyrightable, it has to be copyrightable before you can have a license. have copyright, there has to be some human input. And the data which has come out of a machine, has that had enough human input that you could actually put on a copyright? We don't know. Publish your results open access. And this is just because data is really hard to reuse if you can't get to the method section in the research article, usually. And so even if you make your data open access, but the research article is behind a paywall, then the data might be completely useless. So do that. And then finally, cite your data set with its DOI in your publication so people can unambiguously get to the right data. And we're going to go flowchart first, but I think we need a break. So I want to do that exercise now. Go to your university's homepage and try and find out if your university has a data publication policy, open access policy. I have no idea what it's going to be called. But what rules are you working under before you even start this? Yeah. I'm formally subject to the same one. So, but see if you can find it. Yeah. Tell interesting story that we recently actually did quite a big survey on data publication to find out what's the state of. Excuse me, second. So we did a big survey about data publication and open access, and then realized, well, we knew before we started we were going to have to make the results available open access and or at least publish them. So we discovered, these are all the problems that everyone has talked about. Has anyone found any successes so far? Yes? Which university and what have you got? I'm sorry, the... Uh-huh. Oh. Oh, that's okay. It's, I think I mean, you know that you have to comply with the law. This is what like this goes without saying. The question is, what's above that? Yes, what have you got? Writing data management plans for grants and proposals. How best to meet the requirements. That looks interesting. You can have a look and see what it says. Yeah, it's got about how to write it. Yeah. It wasn't totally clear what the requirements are. Has anyone else succeeded in finding a policy? Yes? Okay, what was it called? It was the data research data management policy. Yeah. Not the one? Oh, okay. Finding documents in university web pages can be a struggle. Now we got.
Open them quick data, message data,
Oh.
cycle data.
All right. So it tells you what it sort of goes through.
Yeah.
But does it actually say? It says it should, in principle, be, yeah. Huh? Yeah. Ah, interesting. So well, the question is, it's like as university employees, do you have to publish that or do you not? Has anyone found from publicly funded research? Yeah. Ah, yeah, yes. Okay. Uh-huh. Ah, okay. Oh, that's also another, yeah, another way of doing it. Hmm. Yeah. Ah, okay. No hard requirement. No. Okay. Yeah. No, so it's how I don't know how many you've got to actually publishing papers yet as part of your research, but certainly in Sweden, whenever you publish a paper, you have to register it in a system. Do you have similar things that? Yeah. So a university has its own database of all papers that are published by researchers at the university. So whenever you publish something, you have to make sure that you add it in there. So this is also something to look up and find. I mean, you can ask your supervisors. So when we publish, where do we register that we've done this? Does the university keep its own database? And if they do, they also take data sets on like register data sets. Yeah. Okay. Possibly. Yes. Not one I'm familiar with. But these are good things to find out. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That type of thing. No. Okay. Yeah. In Sweden, the university funding is dependent on how many publications the universities do. So they need to, that's why they need to keep the records. So it might be different. But yeah, so this is on your to-do list after the course. Is if you don't have an ORCID, you should get one. Find out if you have what your university's data publication policies are. Is there one? Do they have a suggested license, for example? And then 3, do you need to register publications anywhere? This should come up in the data management plan, sort of. I mean, there is a layer. The answer, I guess, is no, not always, but it crops up somewhere. My wife is a biomedical researcher, and she had the absurd situation that let me try and remember how this went. They wanted just saliva samples for protein tests, but because they were collaborating with American universities who had diversity and inclusion policies, which I'm not complaining about, but which required that to have a even spread of racial profile of research participants, which in Sweden is the other way around. You're not allowed to have a racial profile of your research participants if it's not relevant, and it wasn't relevant. It's like, well, how do we do this? We can't make these two work together. And in the end, they find out that you can actually buy saliva samples rather than just spitting it in a test tube yourself. And this was the way forward. So it was a lot of expense and a lot of work for something which, like, they could have just provided a sample. Anyone can provide a saliva sample. So yeah, these problems crop up. Okay. Have we got a bit more energy to go a bit further? Data publication flowchart. So this is a problem which often crops up, is that you have a journal or a requirement from your funding provider that you have to make data openly available where possible. But you as a researcher, you don't want to make your data openly available until your research article is published. And so how does this work? And I'm afraid it's rather complicated. Common situation is the initial article submission must indicate where the data will be published and that the data should be published after the article is accepted as a prerequisite for final publication. So I don't know how many of you have been through this process of reviewing, like fixing articles for review yet? Who's got the whole way through? Yeah? Yeah. There's this, you submit it, you get it back, you do revisions, you submit it, you get it back. And a few of you have been through this already. Yes? Yeah. Okay. So right at the end of that, when you finally get there, they'll say, now we accept this article and we send it to our copy editor team who will complain about the font size and want some small changes done before they finally publish. And that's the stage, that really last stage, the final revision stage, is where journals sometimes say, okay, now you've got to publish your data before we finally make this, before we finally publish the article. So what you often do here is you use a private link. Have I talked about this? No, throwing the equipment around. I'm going to talk more about that later, actually. I guess it's a bit out of order. But, okay, so the process looks something like this, I'm afraid. It would be really nice if it was all integrated. And as a research data repository, we would love to work with the journals so that it can all just be made to work, but it doesn't. And so it goes something like this. All right, you're going to submit, you have the article process up the top, and you have the data process. Whoops, this is really weird, down the bottom, like an old broken Wii or something. Yep. And you somehow need to sync up these two so everyone gets the information they want at the time they want. Yeah, you would hope so. They do the review. I mean, this is where they do the review and then they publish the thing. That's what you pay them for. And then down here is the data process. You're trying to get that ready at the same time. And you want to get the whole thing linked up. I'm going to, I think, abandon this for this, right? Okay. So you go here, you've got your manuscript in preparation, and you submit it to the journal. Yes, big step. Now it goes to review, and you see I have this little circle because this is what happens. You're going to have to find reviewers, and that reviewer didn't like it, and that reviewer sent it back, and then goes to the same reviewer again, and now they want different changes to what they wanted the first time, but you know how this, well, you'll find out how it goes. But eventually you get to here. Either you get rejected and you start again, or you end up journal accepts. That's great. Now, if some journals have an open data policy, some don't. This assumes the journal has an open data policy. You're going to have to make the data available. So when you go here, the submitted version, you just say in your data availability statement, we will make the data available in this repository. Some journals have a stricter requirement that the data has to be made available to the reviewers. Now, if they have that, it means this bit has to be moved back, right? You've got to start with the data first. But very often, you submit your paper first, and then you think about making the data available. So we'll go with that. So you just say where we're going to make it available. And then after submitting your paper, you think, okay, now I need to start the data submission process. So you start that, and this is our repository, but that's okay. It can be any repository. And when you fill in the metadata, often there's a field, okay, where is this data set described? Where's the research publication? Of course, there isn't one yet. But if you just say, well, it's in this journal submitted, you've probably seen this type of citation style. Instead of having a journal and a year, just say submitted. And then there'll be a review here, but this is usually much less painful. And mostly, if you start these at the same time, if you submit to a curated repository, the data will be finished way first before the journal, right? And then the repository, they'll send back an email or there'll be some information back to the researcher. Here's the reserved DOI. So that string, that number, that magical number that the journal wants, you get it, but it won't work. So it's a link. Someone clicks on it, nothing will happen. It will just say, this DOI doesn't exist. That's because it's reserved, but it's not published, because you don't want the data set published before the journal paper is accepted. So in some cases, I mean, we always provide a private link as well, but which you can provide to the journal if they want it. But anyway, you've got a DOI, it's just not active. So now we go for a little bit further here. And now the journal has accepted. And if it's a journal with an open access policy, they say, okay, now you need to put in your DOI into your data availability statement. So here you just had a placeholder data availability statement. Data will be in Zenodo. But here you need to say, this is the real DOI. And then, because they're not going to publish until this link works, you've got to go back to your repository and say, now you need to publish your data. And some repositories, you can do this yourself with a click. Ours, you send a message and we do it. And so then your dataset DOI is live and your article can be published. And then you've got the DOI for the article, because you get that when you publish a paper, and the DOI for the dataset. And the last thing you should do is take this DOI from the article and add it back to the metadata description for your data set. And then you're done. You've got the right DOI. People can come in here to the data set. They can see the DOI for the article and they can go up here, or they can read your article, the data availability statement, and they can go down here. And as I say, it would be really nice if this was integrated, but unfortunately it's not. And usually to get these links working is a lot of back and forward. But I guess the important thing to know is there's this chicken and egg. You don't want to make the data available until the article is published. This is becoming the standard way of doing it now. So, and the only exception is if the journal requires that the reviewers have access to the data set, then you need to have gone through this process first. If you use a curated repository, which I advise. So by curated repository, I mean, there's a data curator who looks at it and says, you didn't include a description. Can you include a description, please? That's really useful. All right. Now let's get into it. What can and can't you publish openly? Surprisingly, you can publish quite a lot of stuff. You can't publish personal information, and I'm going to talk about that more. You shouldn't publish data sets that include other material that are subject to copyright. And this comes up, usually you want to include a diagram from a journal article that isn't Creative Commons. This is annoying. You have to go back to the journal and say, I want to include this diagram. They'll say yes, but you need to get permission. You might be working with other copyrighted data, but I'm assuming probably not the type of research you're doing. Research partner rights. Now, I haven't talked about intellectual property, but if you're making something that might be used in a patent application or that might have commercial value in itself, don't publish it openly. You'll blow your patent application completely if you do. Have you talked about this much during the project, by the way? Patents and commercialization? No? It's sort of this is a bit too early, is it? This type of research you're doing is. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I guess some data sets have value by themselves, some algorithms have value by themselves. Which doesn't mean you can't sell it even if you've published it. My brother was saying where, but was talking with a company who was charging a lot of money for a very secret and highly specialized algorithm, and he asked, well, is there any documentation for this? I would like to know more about it. And they said, oh yeah, it's all in this student's thesis. You can go and get it for free. Okay. But because most people don't go and read doctoral theses, they could still charge a lot of money. So keep that in mind. No national security issues. Yeah, I think you're probably going to be okay with this one. You'd be amazed what's a national security issue these days. Anything to do with infrastructure, electricity, water, harbors. Like, but we had people recently say they had done what they had done. They did water quality sampling in like drains, road drains. They said, but we can't publish the coordinates of the drains. I was like, okay. But anyone can go and measure where the coordinates of the drains are. But no, this was the condition. So be aware of that one, even though you're probably not. Yeah, it's possible. Unlikely, but yeah. But I know there's real problems here. I mean, we have, yeah, an engineer I talked to said that they can't share, like, they want to take a small picture of a small part of a control system for traffic. It's like just for a report. And they said, no, you can't. They said, but no one can like do anything with this. They said, yeah, there's actually foreign agents and they'll look through all these reports and you think you've published this one little section, but they'll pull out every report that all includes one little section and they'll build a map. So yeah, what you're saying is true. Uh, so it's something we're starting to. It happens less than you think, actually. And even if it does happen, I mean, the drain was a good example. The actual data, the quality of the contaminants in the water, there was no national security implications on that. It was just where did they sample? So from a research point of view, the data would have been quite reusable anyway, even without the coordinates. You just need to know what environment. This was the industrial environment. This was the park environment. This was the residential environment. Aggregated data and statistics. So even if you start with personal information, if you calculate statistics on that personal information so that you can't get to the original data, then you can publish it. Anonymized data, I'm going to talk about that more in a minute, can be published. Now, do I have a full something on closed review? I just point out that most repositories have a way of sharing data with collaborators or with the paper reviewers. We call it closed review, others call it reviewer link, private link or something. So you finish your data set, it's basically ready to go, but you're waiting. And this is not what I mean by restricted access. So restricted access, I'm talking a permanent restricted access or not. So for us, let's say it's a personal information, sensitive personal information in a data set. You can provide a link to the reviewer, but they don't like of how the data set will look, but they still need to apply for access and say, oh, well, according to GDPR, I'm allowed to have this data because I'm doing whatever it is. Here's an interesting one. Possibly, you can share personal information if you've specifically asked your research participants if you can do it. And for this to work, you need to say they need to have consented that the data can be shared for unrestricted purposes if you're going to make the data available on the internet. Because you don't know who's going to do what with that data set, right? If it's freely available, anyone can take it. They can do anything with it. And so people have to consent to that, basically, if you're going to make it freely available. This is unusual. But it happens. And I guess the main time it happens is when someone's doing something, your research participants are not, I mean, we often think of research participants as like you donate a sample, for example, but you have to formulate it really exactly what you're going to do. So no, not what everyone else is going to do. You have to say, do you give permission for people for this to be used for this exactly this data? And it might be, I don't know, the data set being derived from your instruments, that it can be used for unrestricted purposes. So, and if people consent to that, then you can publish. But I don't think people like to do this. Yes. That would, I guess you would know beforehand how many people have consented and how many have not. And then you have to make an assessment, is it worth doing? So something like imaging data, maybe it's worth, even if only five people out of 100 say, yeah, you can publish this unrestricted, it's probably good to do anyway. Whereas if you're collecting data to make a statistical sample, maybe it's not worth it. Where this usually comes actually is in the type of research where, like ethnological research, what was it like to live in England in the Great Depression? Okay, and you're interviewing people and they're telling their stories, and they want their stories to be told. Okay? Their stories is personal data. There's no getting around that, but they're not telling you as a researcher with the idea that you're going to analyze this and lock it away. The whole point is to get this out. And so that's when this mainly comes up, I think. Or in cases where the personal data is completely incidental, I suppose. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, so just to give some examples, here's a freely accessible data set. The point is here's the data files down here. Download the data files, click, click, click. Whereas a restricted access data set looks like this, add a request for the data. And then you go to a whole another web page and you say, what am I going to use it for? Who am I? What university? How do I deal with GDPR? But otherwise, the publication process is, for us at least, it's more or less the same. It's the same forms you fill in. It's just that you have a checkbox, no access. You say access has to be restricted because it has personal data. And importantly, and so here, the thing is you get a DOI still. That's the important thing. When you publish with restricted access, your data set gets a DOI, the data files are preserved, and you can cite your data set. Depending on the repository and where and your university, like who owns it, it might also be that once you've published with restricted access, you don't get to decide who gets the data files. So if you publish to Zenodo, you can't publish there with personal data, they say no. But maybe you just don't want this data set to be accessible. Someone who wants it, they request it directly to the data depositor, right? But if you were to publish in your institution's repository, which you probably would if it's personal data, then it's actually your university who has to decide if someone gets it or not. It's not you as a researcher anymore. Probably. I'm guessing most of you work under the conditions that your university owns the data sets. Well, you need to think about this one too. Sweden's a bit odd this way, is that usually the researcher owns the products of research, but the university still owns the data set. Yeah, so if you develop intellectual property, you have the rights to exploit it. In Sweden for most universities. But if you set a data set to a research data repository, if someone comes in under freedom of information laws and says, are your university is a government organization, so I want to get hold of that research data, then the freedom of information laws bypass the individual researcher. I'm guessing this is the same all across Europe. I don't know for sure. It will be interesting to know. Yeah. Once Sweden is the extreme in that you can get stuff before it's finalized, but a data set being submitted to a repository is pretty finalized. So it's worth, yeah, it's something to think about. However, what I've heard is this is a good thing. I've heard researchers are quite happy that they don't need to decide who is allowed to access the data set, and they don't want to be liable for making mistakes. They much rather that the university and their lawyers and their administrators take that hit. And for popular data sets, this can take a lot of time as well, that you don't want to be sitting there deciding who else gets to use it, especially if they're not going to collaborate with you. So some things to think about there. And there was access. There's some other things, not just personal data, that should be shared with restrictions. And if you cooperate with companies, then they might have limits on what you're allowed to share or how you're allowed to share it. I'm seeing someone nodding up there. Do you have this in this project, that you have access to data just for the project, or? Yeah. Okay. Your patient data is a whole different level, but yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. So I've had, I mean, I guess the situations we have are where the PhD student is even working in a company, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if anyone's working with a company, decide really early on in the research who owns the data you collect. This is, from our experience, this is one of the biggest problems with any type of data publication is you work with the data, you get to the end, it's like, okay, who owns this? And it happens mostly, I can say, between hospitals and universities, where you have a doctor who's working both as an academic and as a medical doctor, and they've got the data on a own computer rather than in this system or that system. I thought, no, this is a nightmare. So really encourage that from the start. Decide who's going to own the data, who formally owns the data set anytime you're working for two bosses at the same time. But there's sometimes, can also be that a company provides data for you to research on, but you're not allowed to share. And even if the data from your research isn't exactly their data, it might be close enough that they don't want you to just make it all publicly available. But they might be happy if you share it with restricted access. We talked about national security implications. I talked about infrastructure. Photos from drones are really sensitive in Sweden. I don't know if it's the same anywhere else. Okay. So in Sweden, it's got completely crazy. You have to apply for permission to share any image taken from a drone. So I can take a photo of you here and I could share that with your permission. If it's like a drone sitting here taking the photo, it would be illegal for me to share it. Okay, so they need to be flying, yes. I'm not sure. It doesn't count as an aerial vehicle if it's a, I don't know. I have to say, there's a long list of exceptions, and I'm pretty sure indoors would be in that list of exceptions. So, yeah, maybe I'm being a bit harsh there, but in principle, you need to be careful. Copyright material, I mentioned, can easily sneak in as a diagram, for example. And we're going to talk about data management plans after lunch, but think early on, right? This data I'm doing, is it something I can make open, or are there reasons not to make it open? Ethical, commercial, or legal? Yeah. Right. What time does this session end? At 1:30. All right. Okay. We'll go then. Data sets containing personal information. What is personal information? It is information that directly or indirectly refers to a living, identified, or identifiable natural person. This is the Swedish definition. So natural person is a bit strange, but this one is often forgotten. They have to be alive. There can still be reasons to protect data, even from dead people, obviously, but GDPR is only for people who are alive. And you can think what this means for us as a research data repository, that when someone says, oh, well, this data set has to be restricted because it's about people, and now it's 50 years later, are these people alive? How do we know? So eventually, what is personal data will not be personal data. I don't even remember, actually. Yeah. Yeah. I assume it's something like that. Yeah. But I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure at all. Yeah. I think this is the same problem in Sweden, where if you have a one-person company, your company name and your personal ID number is the same. So I think that's the issue. Now, pseudonymized data is personal data. That pseudonymized means there's no direct identifier. There's no name, there's no social security number, there's no email address. There's nothing that's directly connected to a person. There might instead just be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a number given by the researcher, and then somewhere else there's what's called a key code, which has the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the names and identifiers of the people. But the point is that it doesn't matter whether you have the identities of the people or not, it's still personal data. So as a researcher, you're probably going to be working with personal data connected to tissue samples or other types of samples. You almost certainly won't, I'm guessing in most cases, you won't have any way of knowing who these samples were taken from. But it's personal data anyway. There is a recent EU legal court decision which is going to change this, but at the moment, this is what we have to stick with. And there's sort of degrees of this. If the same organization has the key code and the data, it's way personal data, right? When the one organization has the key code, but now the data has gone to somebody else in another organization, maybe you've got more of a chance to say it's not personal data. But work with this for the moment. GDPR is really explicit. Pseudonymized data is personal data. And then there's this indirect personal data as well. And this, I think, probably changes across, is different across the EU, how this is interpreted, but recorded voice in Sweden is treated as personal data. Presumably not just 1 or 2 words, but an interview with someone is always considered personal data because I think these days you can probably identify who it is. Yeah. Sorry again, does the? No, that's right, exactly. So you can anonymize data by making a transcription of it and removing any of those giveaway words when someone mentions who they work for or other people they work for or what school they go to and that type of thing. And Sweden is pretty crazy in that if you keep the original data, the transcript will be considered personal data. If you destroy the voice recording, then you can anonymize. But they don't like you to destroy voice recordings. But it's a good, if you want to make personal data, that's how you have to do it. Photographs where people are identifiable, and I'm sure you've all been asked to give your permission at some stage in a something or other that you can be photographed and the photographs can be put on the web, and this is why. How identifiable does a person have to be in a photograph? We don't know. This actually caused us problems at some stage. It was on a citizen science project where people were taking photos of algal blooms and submitting into a data set. And of course, there's people in these files too that haven't been sorted out. So it can be a problem. Famously, IP addresses are personal data from the Schrems. Was it Schrems? I don't remember. But this went all the way to the top of the European Court to say, are these personal data? Yes, they are. So if any time you use some sort of online survey, you have to be careful that it doesn't say their IP addresses. Right. Now, so this is the point I want to make. Oh, this is, yeah, it's in combination Swedish and English, but we'll deal with it. All right. Removing identifiers doesn't anonymize a data set. And this is the biggest mistake we see with people submitting data saying it's anonymous. And we say, no, it's not. Here we've got name, email, age, what do you call that? We'll call it sex, man or woman, education level, council, response on some political question, and that was included specifically to make this sensitive personal data. And then, yeah, förtroende för myndigheter. Förtroende is, what do you say? Whether you're doing a good job or not. All right, so this is personal data, right? This is way personal data. It's got names and emails. You really never want to work with data like this. As a researcher, you should always work with pseudonymized data. You should take this off before you even see it, before you start analyzing it. Hopefully even your survey tool will do it for you these days. This should be in one file and then just serial number 123 for the data. And this is both for data protection, but it's also research ethics. What happens if someone you know turns up in the data set with their political opinions? So, there's some interesting ones in there, yeah. No, exactly. So you're correct. This is not personal data. This is fake data, obviously. But it would be personal data if it was real people. And you don't make it personal data just by making a copy and deleting the names. If you completely delete the names, then yeah, it might be personal data. We'll talk about that. But if you make one copy without the names and say, this I can publish, but I have the original version for myself, no. It's the version without the names will still be personal data in that case. The other reason it might not be personal data, it might be personal data, even if you take away all the names, is the re-identification risk. Now, this is best explained by this type of guess who game. Is there anyone else old enough to have played this as a kid? Yes, or maybe you weren't old enough. That was a bad question. Has anyone else played this? Yes, okay. How does it work? Yeah. No, this is good. This is right. Yep. Yep. Yes, and you answer yes or no. So you say, does the person have a hat? If they do have a hat, then you can say, okay, it's going to be that person, that person, that person, that person, that person. And there's a few more. And you flip down all the ones that are ruled out. And you have to try and get to the person before the other one. There's so much information available now that you can identify people with relatively little information, especially, I'll say, the outlier people. So maybe people who are very old, because the further you get, the fewer people there are with a certain age. So if we take this example here, it's in Swedish, but I'll read it out. So we have a 29-year-old woman with a master's degree living in the commune of Bromölla, which has in the center of the commune 8,000 people, or 12,000 in the greater council, and a really nice dinosaur too, I have to say they have. Now, the question is, how many people might this be? This is not a university town. There's not going to, even EU countries have a pretty good education level, but there's not going to be too many people who have a 5-year education by the time they're 27 in this community. And then you also get the question, okay, how many people on average can it be before it's personal data? Like, if it's only one person, then obviously it's personal data. You've identified that person directly. What if there's 2 who match this description? Is it personal data or is it not? By the time you get up to 100, obviously it's anonymized then. You've got 1 in 100% chance. But somewhere we don't know what the value is. Yes. Yeah. So none of these questions have good answers. I'd say about 5. Legally, I'm not sure. Legally, they'll. Yeah. I would say it depends on. Yeah. there's I'm not gonna go right into this. I'd say legally, in the end, it also depends a bit on the sensitivity. So when you think about can this be published openly, you might think this one is about like political opinions. Maybe that's a bit more sensitive than, I don't know, food preferences for chocolate. I could be wrong, but I mean, it's obviously sensitive personal data. So this is more sensitive. You're going to have to, rather than thinking straight statistically, you kind of think a little bit risk assessment. Okay, you have to be more careful here. Make sure these people can't be re-identified. But I think 5 is for not sensitive data. 5 is probably a good number to use. If you think there's less than 5 people have a particular characteristic, often you'll just see a little, like in census data, there'll be, since they won't tell you how many people have this characteristic, it'll just be a little asterisk. Could be 1, could be 5. Sensitive personal data we've mentioned, but we haven't said what it is. It is data revealing racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious, philosophical beliefs, trade union membership. In addition, though, genetic data, biometric data, and this means specifically for the purpose of uniquely identifying a person. So data that can be used as an identity check. Health data and data about someone's sex life or sexual orientation. There's a lot of things you could put into this if you wanted to, and it's not clear what is the boundary of health data. Yeah, I think they mean religion, but religious or philosophical beliefs. So if you were to, I'm guessing if you did a survey and you had a series of multiple choice questions and one was atheism, agnosticism, I would guess that would count as personal data, a sensitive personal data. So sometimes you know straight away, yes, we have gene data. Obviously, this is personal data. What about the gene data of intestinal flora? Is that personal data? You would say yes? Yeah. Sorry? Yeah. But what about if I was 2 years old? Because by the time I'm the age now, it's all completely changed. Yeah. No, but not your. Yeah. Yeah. So I think if I had gut microbiome genetic data, I would absolutely treat it as sensitive personal data for sure. But this is the sort of thing you want to take the decision on early in the research. I mean, and mostly it will affect the ethics application. It certainly does in Sweden. It should affect how you store the data as well. So decide whether what you're going to be working with is sensitive or not. But is it personal data? Is it sensitive personal data? Interesting, there is an article 5.1. The processing of photographs should not systematically be considered to be processing of special categories of personal data. Which is a bit of a surprise, given that a photograph you'd think can reveal a lot. But if we take the top image, you would think this reveals religious beliefs. Does it? Anyone can dress up however they want. So the decisions don't always go the way you would think they would go. So handling of sensitive personal data is prohibited unless you have an explicit exemption. And there's a few of these. And the usual one in research is consent. So your subjects must give their consent. It can also be that the data have been made public by subject. I think if I was doing research onto like political research, where obviously you're studying the political beliefs of politicians, but you would argue they've already made public this information. Another one is for archiving purposes in the public interest. And in fact, for scientific or historical purposes, you're allowed to use sensitive personal data. This is why we're allowed to do it. But the archiving purposes is interesting because it means you can publish sensitive personal data with restricted access because you're doing it for archiving purposes. Interpretations may vary, but that's what we rely on. Okay. So what do you do with personal data? You want to, whenever you're using it, or especially if you're going to publish it, what do you do to reduce re-identification risk? And there's a couple of steps, some of them. So the first one is omit information that enables identification. So the example we had before, you had email addresses. Obviously, you would take that out. Maybe you don't even need to collect it in the first place. So depending on your survey, did you need their email addresses? Or was it enough that they just filled in the survey for you? Masking or replacement. So you can hide identifiers or replace with random identifiers. This one is mainly in for transcripts. So someone mentions another person, you replace that person's name with a fictitious name. But usually you want to be consistent, right? They refer to one person in one context here in this part of the interview. They talk about them later on. So you want to use the same name. And generalization is the third thing you can do. And reduce the granularity. And the examples, I think, illustrate it. That rather than, maybe you don't need the exact age of the person, that they were 39. Maybe it's enough to categorize people into 30 to 39, 40 to 49. So you have, it's harder to re-identify a person. Maybe you didn't need the actual council postcode they lived in. Maybe it would be enough to say, what city do you live in for your study? So you have more people have the same values. And recoding rare categories as other. If you ask, what job do you do? And someone, I don't know, CEO of top 20 company, yeah, there's not many of them. Maybe you could just say other there, and then it's harder to re-identify the person. Anonymizing data. If you want to, generally, if you want to make a data set that has contained personal data freely available, it has to be anonymized. And by that I mean, you have to delete everything that identifies the people, directly or indirectly, so that it's no longer possible to link the data to an individual, not by any reasonable means. And this means that in principle, not even the researcher who collected the data should know what data is connected to which individual. So you can think this makes anonymizing transcripts in principle impossible if you go this definition. In practice, we do it anyway. We treat transcripts as anonymized. But well, it's never gone to the full way up to the European court, so we don't know exactly what would happen. What do you have for personal data in this project? So what do you have for anything derived from a person? You have age, yeah. Yeah, okay. Do you treat it as anonymous data, or would you still treat it as personal data? And who has that P159? Is there some other data? Is there somewhere a database with that P159 in it? Yeah, it's the only thing you know. But the question is, does somebody else have that? Yeah. There's that's always a bit of it. Yeah, this is often the case. That you think it's anonymized because there's no possible way you could identify these people, but it might still legally be personal data. It's yeah. Yeah. Aha, yeah. But you would want to trace back to find out who they were, not someone. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll have to leave it to your supervisors and your. Okay, yeah. Uh-huh. It's so nice if you don't have to deal with personal data. It's like, as a climate scientist, this is so nice. Yeah. 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 Sounds not protected anymore. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I'm not an expert at all on personal data for imaging. I get surprised sometimes what comes up in our archive as this is anonymized and this is not. Yeah. Mhm. This is what, yes. And I'm really glad you bring that up because I've been thinking this, and this is also what we find, that it's these consent forms often which make data, personal data, especially if you only have a few participants in a study. Even if you can't say, well, this participant, you know the participant names because you have their records and you have to keep those consent forms. Even if you can't say, well, this is their image, if there's only 10 people, we get back to the point we were on before is, well, is this personal data or not? And it's usually treated as, yeah. And what else? We certainly have, we have the case of data images extracted from medical databases without tagging, where people have argued that, well, there's like so many images in this database and there's no easy way of, there's no API or anything. It would be so hard for someone to go through and find that image that we'll treat it as anonymous data as well. It's one of these cases I've heard too. But as I say, the GDPR was meant to make the rules the same across Europe, and it's failed dismally. Courts all across Europe have had their own interpretations. But maybe it'll converge eventually when we have enough court cases to go on. All right, what was I going to say? What I was going to say was we do not generally recommend trying to anonymize data just so you can publish it. It takes time. There's a chance you'll make a mistake. There's a chance that someone is going to come in and say it's not anonymous anyway, which we've had happen. So it depends on the situation, of course, but generally, if it starts as personal data, treat it as personal data the whole way through. Take steps to make it less anonymizable. You always work with pseudonymized data. pre-processed, removed names and things, but treat as personal data anyway. So what do you do? And I mentioned here that there's archiving regulations too. You may be expected to retain the original data set, and the journals will have their own look at their rules. Say, what do they expect you to do? Do you have to keep your patient samples? Do you have to keep your raw data? My recommendations are you can publish a pseudonymized data set with restricted access if you have a repository that you can use, especially your own institution has a repository. Otherwise, just archive it if you have to, and then publish a metadata only description in Zenodo. They don't like it, but they're never going to complain. Just upload the documentation. This is the documentation for this data set held at this archive, and give that to the journal, and they'll be happy. Of course, you should have. So always, I'm going to stop here, but I think always try and reduce the risk of identification as much as you can when you start. Never collect personal data you don't need. This is what you say. You need the consent forms, but if you don't need to say, you don't need to tag an image with a particular individual, then you don't do it. I don't know, is that how your study works? That you have you know who was in the study and you know these were the scans, but you can't connect other than with like age and gender, I guess. Is that right? Well, I don't know, but yeah. Yeah, okay. But you don't explicitly tag the data with the names. No, exactly. Yeah, no names in the database. Exactly. This is what I mean. Reduce the risk as much as you can when you start with it. All right, I think we are heading towards close. Where am I? Right. I'm not going to go through the long list. I just make the difference I've mentioned a few times. I talk about publishing with restricted access. That means permanent access, which is different to having your data set under not public while you're waiting for your paper to be accepted. So it's two different things. Restricted access is permanent. The data's published. The DOI is active. Whereas when your data set is under review, then it's just a temporary state before the article is published. You can have both freely and restricted access data sets available with the review link. In our repository, it's very clearly stated this data set isn't published. You've just come to here because you've got a review link. And the DOI won't work. That's the other main thing. And Google won't find it as long as we haven't screwed up. And no one has I mean, if you give the private link to the reviewer and they put it in Reddit or something, then of course Google will get it. But you assume that they won't do that. So data sets, before they're published, Google shouldn't find them. Right. So then we get to the last thing, which is embargo. So usually open access policies will say something like the data underpinning, like from a funder, the data underpinning your research findings should be made available within a reasonable time after your article is published. And different organizations and different individuals can interpret that very differently. And I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm really curious as to what you do think. So when I talk about embargo on a data set, it means the data set, which could be made available, there's no personal information on it, but you didn't make it open access because You want more time. You want more exclusive time to work on it. It's not the same as an embargo on a paper. When we talk about an embargo on a research paper, it usually means you can't put it on your website until 2 years have passed or something. So not all repositories support embargo. We don't. What do you think? You put in a lot of work to make this data set that you've got. You can get another paper out of it, but the journal says open access. We've got an open science. I'll put that into your religious beliefs. That's good. This is our policy. Yeah. 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 And this is, I guess, and this is one of the criticisms, is that if we do want researchers to publish the data immediately with the paper, then they'll simply just wait publishing a paper until both papers are finished. And what if this is like a COVID study and this is something really important? I can see that argument as well. But usually it's not the journals it's the funders who will have a requirement within a reasonable time afterwards. I'll leave it up to you to decide what's a reasonable time. I mean, technically, you might publish a paper, you might get it accepted really quickly, and then, oh, now I have to make the data available, and that can take some time. So there's always that technical aspect as well. Our recommendation as a repository is that, well, we let depositors choose themselves if they're going to have. We don't have like an embargo time period. You can't say this data set is restricted, but 2 years from now it will become open, which is how Zenodo does it. But I think you can just say like 100 years and it's effectively closed anyway. We always suggest put in a time. Ask the researcher, how much time do you need? You need 2 years? Okay, we'll get back to you in 2 years. And we know that most of the time researchers have moved on to the next thing. They're not going to have, maybe they've given it to a master's student to work with, but very often that nothing has happened. Because you've got the most value out of a data set the first time. Okay. That's the essentials of publishing data as far as I can think through them.